So this is the very first origin of what became this exhibition. It's a book I made for my dad when he was very ill. And it's just, I took my hand-carved wood blocks of owls and I bound them together to make a little something he could keep next to him in his hospital bed, you know, and look through of the Alaskan owls. And then over time that blossomed and grew into more and more work of different kinds of birds of prey, to where I encompassed all the falcons and the hawks and the eagles and the owls. And then there were two outliers, the harriers and the ospreys that live here in Alaska but didn't fit into any of those family groupings. So I think maybe one of the most fun ways to start out what we're doing is we're here in my studio. I apologize about the mess. It always looks like this, but it's very much a working studio. And I was gonna show you guys what the wood blocks are.
Are they high?
So, here's a great big wood block for one of the larger full-scale pieces. And here are a couple of the smaller wood blocks that I use on the littler pieces. And I don't know if I'm holding, yeah, there we go. We can see the carving in the wood there. And the way I make these is I start with just a blank block of wood, just regular old shelving poplar from Lowe's. And I draw my pattern on it, and then I use hand tools to carve everything out. And here, I'll show you guys the hand tools over here. If you look in my messy drawers. So this is the assortment of different tools. One of my favorite ones is this one. This is a skew knife that a blacksmith up in Palmer handmade for me. Rick, I love your work. I traded him doing some tattoos, and he made me knives. It was great. And so I use those knives, carve out all the imagery. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to make a print, and then we're going to use that print as the prize for our trivia that we'll have towards the end of the thing. So let's do one of the smaller ones. I've got a goshawk and I've got a gyrfalcon. And I think I'm going to do the goshawk because this is the one that Andrew liked best and that he picked to use for the flyer for the show back when we were going to have a brick and mortar show. So let's go ahead and run a print off of this osprey. And here's the book that has been made that is a kind of a compilation of all the writing and woodcuts together. And it started off kind of in a bizarre way. It started off actually as a gift for my dad. And this was the gift right here. I've got a big sheet of glass. Black. There. Roll it out. And I want it to look kind of like velvet on the block. Too much ink and it won't pick up the details of the print. Too little ink and it'll be uneven and not pretty. So I've got my rare ink up, and now I'm going to come here to my block and work across the block. It's important you make sure you get all the corners. The areas, like an osprey has really black plumage on its head, and the beak should be very black, so I'm going to get a lot of color on that. This is a smaller block. I'm just going to hand burnish this one. We're not going to use the printing press just yet. I'm going to take the block, I'm going to arrange it on my printing surface. Take a sheet of paper. I use, this is a Korean-made mulberry paper that my sister-in-law and family members back in the village in Korea, they ship it to us on occasion when we start to run out. It's great, sturdy printmaking paper, and it's actually originally for like construction. Arrange it how we want to set. Now I'm going to take this tool. Now this is a Japanese printmaking baron, and what it is, it's a cardboard disc with a coiled string underneath it, wrapped in a bamboo leaf. And the ridges in this bamboo leaf give it a little bit of texture, so that it presses the paper into the woodblock. Traditionally, they would put a little bit of camellia oil on it, but even more traditionally, the printers would just rub it on their face and get a little skin. As I'm applying the pressure, you can start to see the imagery come through on the back side of the paper. And you can use that as an indication of whether you've done enough pressing. You want to get it nice. And one of the tricks to using these is that you're really relying on like a softer motion. You don't want to push too hard or you're going to tear your paper. You just let those little ridges on the bamboo leaf kind of massage the ink into the paper. And then what I like to do so that I get a nice, I'm sure that I get a nice clear black on my eyeball, which is in the eye is what draws the central focus of the image usually. So I come over the eyeball with my thumb and really kind of give it some pressure down to make sure it took. I'm going to peel that, and I like what I see. So there we have the printed work.
Oh, lovely.
And you can see, if you take a look, the printing is going to be the reverse image of the carved block. So that's something you especially need to keep in mind if you're ever including lettering in your printmaking work, because you can really make a big mistake. And the camera's shaking right now because my son's laughing at me because he's seen me make that mistake so many times. So that's a smaller one. Let's go ahead and we're going to make a bigger one now. And the bigger one, I'm going to use my printing press. I've got a couple presses here in the studio. This one right here is it's an etching press actually, but I just use it for woodblock printing, and I just lighten up the pressure for printing the woodblocks. This big one here that's actually my whole table is, it's a table press. It's from a manufacturer that doesn't exist anymore, and that might have been for good reasons, but it works pretty well for the much larger blocks. All right, so now we're gonna give this guy a shot. And this guy here is a block I carved. I was out skiing in the woods a few years back, and while I was skiing, I found this great gray owl perched up in a tree hunting voles. And it was unfazed by my presence. It let me sit in the snow for about a half hour and sketch it while it was hunting. So I came home, took the sketches, and carved this block. So let's go ahead and get started on it. We're gonna need a little more black ink, so I'm gonna come back over here. Yep. Oh, probably put a little more ink on my block. Now, with these bigger blocks, you really want to be careful that you start at one point and consistently ink all the way across. I like to use Aqua printmaking ink. It's a soybean-based oil, and it doesn't require any toxins for cleanup. It just cleans up with soap and water, and actually it'll clean up really well with just a baby wipe. So I like it. I think it provides as rich a tone as an oil-based ink. It doesn't have the same sheen as an oil-based ink, and it works a lot better with my the papers I use than an oil-based ink does. So it's AKUA. It's brilliant ink.
Thank you.
And it comes in a whole ton of different colors.
Wow.
Yeah, so that I got such a lucky deal. There was another artist that had decided they didn't like it, and they sold me that whole bundle for like 70 bucks. It was great. So I'm gonna finish up on this guy here. Now, on this block in particular, this large mass over here is the tree. And since it's a large birch tree, it's not so critical that the inking be super consistent, because that tree's got a lot of variation, you know, in its patterning and bark. The owl is a great gray owl. It's also called Strix nebulosa, and nebulosa means to be kind of nebulous and misty colored. So it too can handle a little variation in the inking and still look cool. All right, looks like I've got the whole surface moist with ink. Just gonna run a gentle layer across. Now this block is getting very old, and you can kind of start to see here the actual grain of the wood is getting raised the more times I print it. So, you know, there's some subtle changes to the block and the final version of the art as the block ages. Okay, so now I'm gonna clear my workspace. I'm gonna line up myself with this grid here on my workbench so that I know I'm gonna have consistent placing on my paper. Again, I have to wipe my fingers on my t-shirt to make sure that I'm not gonna mess my paper up. So now, with a big piece like this, I really gotta make sure I'm not overlapping. You start your pressure at the center, move out to the edges, and I'm just gently placing it down, patting it in. All right, now I want a piece of paper that's gonna sit over on top of this so I don't mess up my printmaking blankets. So, and unfortunately that piece of paper is under where I need it to be. Now I'm gonna take this, cover it over, and now I'm gonna take both of these guys over to the printing press. Slide it under. Just jump over here. All right, so now it's on my press. It's about as big as this press will allow. I can't go much bigger on paper than this. Now I take the blanket, tuck it in. I'm pretty sure that my my set height is set right. Start feeding through. Yep, I've got good resistance on it. You want not too much resistance. You want it to move through smoothly, you know, so you're not damaging the wood block or overprinting. You know, sometimes you got to run it through once or twice to make sure you're getting it right. Hopefully this will come out right the first time. I don't know if anybody caught that, but I almost knocked over my can of beer as I extended the press across, so I bring it all the way through until I feel it on the edge of the block. Then I'm going to come back. Okay. Now is the moment of truth. Okay, roll up the blanket, get it out of my way. Take paper out of my way. You can tell I need a bigger studio. All right, now before I pull it off, let's take a look-see at it. So again, you can see the imagery starting to come through the paper. I'm gonna look around, and if I see any spots that look a little weak, you know, that like they didn't take enough, I'll come back through with my Baron, and I'll maybe give it a little bit of pressure. It beats the heck out of having to waste the whole thing, you know. Okay, let's give the owl, come in right here. You see the shape of the owl. I'm a little concerned about the coloration in the eyes. Now here's the tough one though. If you do too much, you're gonna rip your paper and then the whole thing's verschmuckled. Oh yes, it's okay. So moment of truth, let's give it a shot. Here, I'm gonna back the camera up a little bit so we can get the full effect. Woo! Yeah, I might have printed it a little too tight. It's sticking. Oh, I think we got a good one. You back it up a little. There we go.
Wow.
Okay. So I think we got a pretty good pull.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the
Wow.
detail in the branch work. You can see the owl nice and
Wow.
clear. I'll back it up so we can see the whole thing. I don't know, what do you guys think? Did it come out all right?
Yes,
Gotta
yes.
give them
Hello.
beautiful as always,
So
Casey.
now on this one, I not to sidetrack or anything, but one of the most, I have no training as an artist. I'm kind of self-taught. So I just kind of picked all these things up on my own, figuring things out as I go along. And one of the most important things I ever read about composing a picture was about the mathematics involved in a composition. And there's this concept, I think it's called the golden spiral, in which a line that comes down from a rectangular composition will cut down in thirds and then curve back in. And I incorporate this shape into a lot of my work. It's where you can kind of see, I've got this line kind of extending like this, and I want to bring it back up around and make the central focus be on that owl. Another thing I wanted to show you guys before we do the trivia is the process that gets me here. How do I get from being sitting on a log out in the woods looking at birds to that? So I have a couple pages marked out in some old sketchbooks. So I never go anywhere without my sketchbook, and they kind of become like a mishmash collage of things. And you can see there's a snowy owl print in this one that,
Wow.
yeah, when I'm working on those sketches that eventually become the prints, I try to keep it all in one similar book. So here you can see some, this is from being in Seward. I've got some puffins out on the water. I think it's a merlet. Some auklets diving. This one I think is a rough sketch of a harlequin duck. So, oh, this is one of the hills across the bay. Little seal popping his head out of the water. So it all starts as life sketches and drawings. And then, oh, this is a cool one. See this little squid right here? I drew this one. I was at the Sea Life Center with my son on a field trip when he was in like 6th grade, and we dissected squid. And inside the squid, there's a little bone structure called the pen. And you can, it's like the only kind of like semi-solid thing in the squid's body. And we took that pen out and we crushed up the squid's own ink and then did a little sketch drawing of the
Oh,
squid
wow.
with its own pen and ink. So
Interesting.
I have this one is marked. This is the sketches that lead up to one of my goshawk prints. Oh, well, here's one of the life sketches of a great horned owl. We get him in the woods up here at the end of my street. And also at the end of my street is my goshawk, which was the subject of probably too many of my woodblock prints. When it came time to do the goshawk page, I had like 15 different prints to pick from. So it hunts in the same woods where I walk my dog and ski. So I had a lot of opportunities to draw it perched up on the trees. Here's some different poses I've got it in. I work through trying to figure out the feathering and the basic structure, and then kind of my end drawing. This was wound up being my favorite drawing that I liked out of all of them. And so then I carved these blocks, and it's a multicolored set, so it's a series. This is the gray of the feathering. This is the color tone of the background, and a lighter gray for the interior feathers. And then this is the black line work. This was one of the first wood blocks I'd ever carved. So this is a little while ago. And the end result came out like this.
Wow.
Oh, nice.
Now that's with a little watercolor in for the red of the eyes and the yellow of the beak. And these smaller prints are all going to be available through the museum, and they're going to look like this. So my philosophy on art and printmaking is that it's my goal to get these images out to people. And we're a large family with a low income, so I want art that people like me can afford. I want art that someone on my budget could have on their wall and make their home feel more beautiful. So what I do is I have a whole small series, and these are the focus of the illustrations, and these are the focus of kind of the whole show. There are much bigger pieces, but these are the ones that are really made for people to keep in their homes. And each one is hand carved. This one is 2 great horned owls. That one is a barred owl. This is a merlin striking a little blackbird in flight. Kestrel, one of my favorite pretty birds. This one is a snowy owl with a lemming. Another one. That's a nice thing about woodblock prints you make. This is that same great gray owl that we just saw the larger block print of. Same bird, same reference sketches, just in a different size. This one is a saw-whet owl, one of my favorites.
I like that.
We hear them all the time from the my friend's cabin that we fish on the Kenai all night. They're amazing little birds. And a short-eared owl. You know, interesting fact about the short-eared owl is that everybody thinks about the snowy as the iconic Alaskan owl, you know, but the short-eared owl has a lot more mythology and folklore related to it, especially in the Yupik culture. There's very little folklore about the snowy owl, but a whole wealth of stories and anecdotes about short-ears. So, you know, cool thing. It's a little noticed owl that is very interesting and important. It's also very interesting and important in the island of Hawaii. The short-eared owl is like the only indigenous owl they have in Hawaii, and there's a whole body of folklore and myths built up around that too. So all these little prints of this size are going to be available through the museum for just $20 at the store, and we can send it to you wherever you are, wherever you'd like to have that owl. And then eventually down the road, when we're in person again, these will also be available at the museum store for the same price. And there's bigger ones available too, like the big one that we pulled, the big owl in the tree. That one's about an $80 print through the store.
I have a question. What kind of press were you using, and how heavy was it?
Oh, okay. This guy here, the one I was using is it's a Dick Blick, kind of a discount artist supply store. The actual press itself is made by the foundry is called Trident, and it's in Brazil. So I think it was about the most reasonable printing press that I could find that had a 36 by 18 inch bed to it. This other one here, the much, much larger one, is a Wheelan press. And the Wheelan press is, well, they don't make them anymore. So if it ever breaks and I need parts, I'm out of luck. My son's arms are getting too tired, so I'm going to hold the phone myself and let him take a break. Go stretch your arms, honey. This is my youngest, Ian. He's helping out today. He's always a huge help. Thank you, honey.
How did you get so interested in birds?
Well, I grew up in Detroit, and there was this big woods next to where my parents lived. Oh my gosh, I've like tiger striped myself doing this work. Sorry, guys. And in those woods, there was a mating pair of great horned owls. And I used to go and try and find them all the time. And one of the first big birding memories I ever had was I saw a group of crows mobbing that one of the great horned owls, and that image, that impression of all these black crows just swarming down on this big owl and chasing it through the sky, it just stuck with me, and I like birding ever since. Well, the printmaking came differently. Artistically, I had always just I had sketched and doodled, but then I was mostly into tattooing as a teenager and a young adult. Did a lot of ink work. Most of my work was on people's skin and in my sketchbooks. And then I moved to Asia, got married, settled down. My wife didn't like tattooing. And so I was looking for other artistic ways to express myself. And I actually didn't start printmaking until I was here back living in Alaska again. And I took my children on a road trip to Fairbanks, and we went to the Museum of the North. And I saw a video of the amazing Fairbanks printmaker, Sarah Tabert. And she had this whole exhibit demonstrating how she did her work, and these little kind of tutorial snippets on screens and monitors going in different parts of the exhibit. And I was hooked. I went home and started carving blocks of wood. I just figured it out.
Nikki Newcomb asks, when mandates allow, will there be a printmaking workshop next winter?
I certainly hope we can do a printmaking workshop there in Valdez at the museum. I think that would be awesome. Winter's hard for me because I work here in the schools. During the school year, I work with a preschool program for children who are on the autism spectrum. So it's almost impossible for me to get away from school life during the year, just because the children, the consistency is so necessary. No, I'll be there in the summer. You'll be
Yeah.
fighting me out the door with a broom in the summer. I'll come up.
I have a quick question. When you begin, you have the piece of wood in front of you. Do you sand it and lacquer it?
That's an excellent question. So it depends a lot on the final goal. So sometimes I want that wood grain consistency. Sometimes I'm looking for, this block is going to be like an ocean reflected water, and I'll utilize the wood grain to say that for me. Most of the time, if it's just like a straight representational black and white piece, like the osprey or the owl that we looked at, I would smooth sand the wood down with varying grits. I'd start off on a rougher grit and work down to the finest grit I could, just to get that nice consistency. And that is, it's almost more for ease of carving, because eventually with the absorption of the ink, that grain's going to come back into the wood. And over time it will start to show again. I do lacquer or shellac some of my boards, primarily boards that I'm going to be doing, that I know I'm probably going to print with different colored inks on, and I want to create a waterproof layer on it so that then I can wash those inks away and start a new color on it without polluting, you know, tracing color from one paper to the other. But again, it varies a lot, especially on what kind of effect I'm going for.
Hazel asks, is the paper archival or will it eventually discolor? Good question.
I use a few different kinds of paper. The main paper I use, like the ones you guys just saw me using, it is not a strictly archival paper in that it's been treated and sized. It will over time take on a little yellowing color to it. I have prints of it that are, you know, probably 7, 8 years old and don't show any discoloration. I'm saying I've seen it discolored because it's used for construction purposes in South Korea. So, you know, when I've been in homes in Korea, you know, over time, those ones that are, you know, covering a window, they'll start to yellow with being out in the sun. That said, if the concern is very much to keep that paper pristine, any paper that you expose to sunlight over time is going to yellow and change. The best kicker that the best insurance you could have would be a good frame with the archival glass that has the very high-end expensive glass that will prevent those UV rays from reaching the artwork.
And don't display them in direct sunlight.
Yes, that too. Now, but I should say that my multicolored works, when I do the multiple block, several color mokuhanga style printmaking, I tend to use a very thick cotton rag printmaking paper like an Arches or something like that. And those are what's advertised as archival. However, I have noticed that even those papers tend to discolor if you apply too much ink. The way that these inks dry, the ink won't dry. It only dries through absorption into paper fibers. So if you over ink your blocks and you overprint your image to where the ink is pooling up on the surface, it will absorb right into the paper. And then if there's excess ink still on the surface of the paper, sometimes those unpigmented soybean oils will leach through onto the edge of the paper, like into, I'm trying to show you here, like this area, there we go. This area here that should be outside the printed image, if you use too much ink, it'll bleed through into that, and you'll see this kind of like yellowy, kind of nicotine stain looking aura around the whole print. So, and that's with the archival papers. So any prints I have, like I could show you over here. Please pardon my messy studio, but like right here, this big pile of rolled up papers, that's all prints that didn't turn out just perfect where I wanted to sell them. And so then I use them, like one of them would have been used to make the cover of this book. This book cover is actually a much larger print that I was running them off, and it's about maybe a foot by 2.5 foot wood block. And if it didn't print out really well, I just take the sections that did work and I use them as chunks in a book or parts of a book cover, or I'll make little gifts, things like that. Sometimes I just fold them up into origami and leave them on people's desks at my work.
But how long would it take you to carve the long block, for example, that you showed us with the...
Well, this one here, it would take, like, for this kind of detail, usually 2 weeks or so. Once everything's laid out, it tends to go a little quicker. Sometimes I get like just really excited about a project and I'll crank out like this osprey, and you can kind of tell it's a little looser and more, it's just not as detailed work. I did this one probably in a day, you know, just sketched it out and carved it out and bam, tried to finish in a day. I've recently started trying to do some big projects that I can't get this good poplar wood in big enough planks, so I wound up having to use plywood. And the problem with plywood is that all the glues in it, in my opinion, plywood's not, you're not really working on wood. You're essentially working on a synthetic base like linoleum printmaking, and I don't really like working on synthetic bases, but sometimes I want to do something really big. When I do a project that big, I tend to use a Dremel or some power tools, because trying to cut plywood with hand tools, the top laminate veneer just cracks off and falls away because of the pressure of your carves. So you just lose what you just spent 2 hours working on. With a Dremel tool, because it's an abrasive action as opposed to like a force, I can get more details. Here's a very large, I gotta get the camera far back enough. This is a very large wood block on a sheet of plywood. And, you know, you can see my hand by it for size comparison. And this one, you know, probably took about 3 weeks to finish the carving on and get all the detail in that. And it was mostly done with a Dremel. And you know what? I happen to have a print of it. Oh, you know, what I need is to have a studio down like in the Nilchik in a little cabin somewhere is what I really want. All right, so here is the mermaid.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh.
Asks, do you ever sell the blocks when you have finished using them?
Oh, you know, I have done some special orders of the blocks, but for the most part, no, because
He doesn't want anybody else to pull prints from him.
The phone was under the art. I'm like looking around, like, where did I put that phone? Well, no, I wouldn't mind. I mean, if I did sell the blocks, I would do it in such a way that I would mess it up so that you couldn't pull new prints off of it. I just like being able to make more art off of them. Like that owl block that we just pulled the prints off of, that one's kind of maybe reaching the end of its life, where I might have to like do some sanding work to it and recarve it a little. So here's,
Wow.
you can see that's the mermaid.
Beautiful.
That's how the finished print comes out. It's actually called The Mermaid's Wife.
Wow.
And it's kind of my answer to the old Hokusai print, The Fisherman's Wife.
Yeah.
And then here, again, you know, for comparison purposes, there's the block next to it. So that's about one of my biggest blocks. I have another big one that I can't get out because there's nowhere to set it down, but a big one of a halibut that I carved. It's roughly the same. It's the size of the halibut that I caught was what I was trying to impress upon people. It's like a, you know, like the fishing lie story, but I carved it into a wood block so it'll live forever. These trivia questions, anybody who's had a chance to actually pre-read the book would have a huge advantage on these because they're kind of bizarre and obscure. And here's the question. Which bird of prey that we get here in Alaska, in 1587, a historian in Britain mistakenly wrote that this bird had 2 different feet on each of its legs. So on one leg, it had a foot with talons on it, and on the other leg, it had a webbed foot like a goose. So which Alaskan bird of prey was mistakenly described as having 1 webbed foot and 1 taloned foot in a British historian's work from 1587? Another bit that this historian wrote down about this bird of prey was that gamekeepers in medieval England used to catch the fledglings. They'd climb up into the nest. They'd take the fledglings out of the nest and then put them down in a platform at the base of the tree and tie them to that platform just at about shoulder height to a person. And the reason why they did this was because the parents would continue to catch fish and bring them to feed to their young that were tied to this platform. And the gamekeeper would just take the fish and bring them home and eat them himself. So he would use this bird to go out and catch fish for him and his family by kidnapping the fledglings. So any guesses on what bird of prey this might be?
Nikki Newcomb,
Nikki
or it
Newcomb.
says
You
an
got it.
osprey.
So Nikki, if you can text us your email address, or not email address, but like a snail mail address, I will take this osprey and we'll sign it up and write a little note on it for you and send it off to you. So there, you know, and there was another cool bit in the book. If you get around to reading the book, Shakespeare mentions a cool old British belief about the osprey. They believed that the osprey actually had the power to hypnotize the fish in the water, and that like they had some mystical ability to kind of force the fish to submit to their will, and then just pluck them up out of my book, the book I wrote.
Oh, yeah.
Let me again. It will be available at the museum or through the museum, and it is very reasonably priced at only $12. And it is chock full of weird historical information about birds like that.
Oh, it's great.
And for the osprey, the quote from Shakespeare actually, yeah. So when Shakespeare wrote Julius Caesar, one of his quotes was, "As is the osprey to the fish, who takes it by the sovereignty of nature." And that quote reflects that they believed that the osprey was the king of the fish kingdom, and the fish would just submit to his will. So osprey is the first question. Second question. Okay, again, we're going to go back to medieval England, but we're also going to go to Mongolia. So this bird in medieval England was known as the cook's hawk. And it was one of the few birds of prey that common people were allowed to use for hunting. All the other birds like the falcons, the gerfalcons, they were very reserved for the nobility. This bird was open to anybody, and it was well known for being able to bring home some bigger animals to eat. But it was also the bird that Genghis Khan used as his emblem, his banner to carry into battle, and his soldiers all had one of these marked in metal on their helmet. So anybody know what that bird of prey might be? Oh my gosh, my mom got that one.
Hey, Mom.
Your mom, Sophie,
But
really
Renee,
did
don't
it.
worry, I'll get you a goshawk too. So yes, that was the goshawk. The goshawk was known as the cook's bird. And again, I have that goshawk that I will print off the blocks we were looking at today, and I will send out a goshawk. Last trivia question. Here we go. This very, very tiny bird of prey caused a big commotion in the late 1960s near Seattle, Washington, when a whole throng of people were convinced for several nights on end that it was actually a UFO. So the very strange kind of musical call of this very small bird of prey had a whole group of people convinced that there was a UFO in the area. And it was only revealed to be actually just a bird when so many people were coming to look for this UFO that they were tromping all over this farmer's field. The farmer knew what it was, and so one night he went out with a shotgun and went to the tree it was perched in and shot it and killed it. So, but what kind of bird would this be? And remember, a very small one. Oh, yep, that's it, Renee. Saw-whet owl.
All
Okay.
right.
Oh, but Nikki said sparrowhawk kestrel. Wow. I don't know what that is. I'll have to look
You know,
it up.
Nikki, you want to know something cool about the kestrel that I found out? The name kestrel comes from the French for, you know, those little instruments that we used to get like in elementary school when the teacher would hand out a whole bunch of different instruments, and there was like that little kind of wooden box on a stick, and when you'd spin it around, it would make a weird kind of clacking noise.
Yes.
You know those?
Anyway.
That's a kestrel. So the name for the kestrel bird actually comes from the French for that little instrument we used to play, because they have a similar sound, I guess. We have a lot of weird and useless bird information now.
I think it's great.
Somebody has to, right?
Yep. Well, it's amazing you know, if you do love birds, if you look in the back of my book, I put a bibliography in of all the different research materials that I found and utilized. And, you know, since I'm thanking people, I should give a huge thanks to the folks at the Alaskan Library System, and especially the people at ARLIS, the library system through the university. They had so much cool materials, and I was able to find, you know, I mean, the journals of people that were living on the Koyukon in the 1890s and collecting folk tales at those times, and some of the first dictionaries translating and working on some of the terms and terminologies. And there's a really cool book that anybody who loves birds and loves Alaskan information should get. And it's a book of ethno-ornithology of the Copper River. And I can't remember the name of the book off the top of my head, but go to your library and ask them for the ethno-ornithology book of the Copper River Basin. It is amazing stuff. Did anybody else have any other questions or anything else?
Kevin, I'd just like to tell you thank you for being persistent and sticking with us. This has been a very interesting ride since March 13th.
I just appreciate having the opportunity to work with you guys, and that you guys are allowing me a venue to sort of show my art. It's very exciting for me, and I really hope that, you know, I know we faced a lot of obstacles in putting this together, and it was crazy, but I think we all worked really well together, and I think that hopefully there's a lot of stuff we can do together in the future, like with what we were discussing earlier about having some printmaking workshops out there.
I totally agree.
I agree.
Well, what's really exciting to me is while we are only having 20 or 30 people in the museum today, and we're like 90% down on our visitation, we got Jolene from Massachusetts. We got folks from all over experiencing this artist talk. Normally it would be 20 people. So now we have 20 people from Hazel's in Ketchikan. Keith, I don't know, where are you? Still in Washington State or something like that?
No, I'm from, actually, I've known Casey all his life. I live in Northville.
Oh, okay.
Right next to
I
where.
thought you were a different Keith. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
right where
You have a
Casey,
doppelganger.
where Casey used to live, yeah.
I was just going to point out that I'm a collector of Kevin's work. So does this one look familiar? This is
Oh
the
my
one,
gosh, yeah.
yeah, that I have of yours?
Have I ever read you the poem that's from that one?
No, and this is one that is 20 Mile Harlequins. No, and I have several over my fireplace and other things, other prints.
That 20 Mile Harlequin one was, again, that was one of my very, very first ever blocks I carved. I mean, that's like probably block number 4 or 5. And
This is one out of the first block, one out of 30 is that print.
Yeah, that
Well,
block.
there you go. Someday it's going to be worth some money.
And you know what, Faith, is I started off with the editioning with those older works, and I don't edition my work anymore. I actually have, I've kind of started a printmaker's rebellion against editioning. It's just in this day and age, it makes it impossible. And the classical, you know, Goya, Druer, Hokusai, none of them addition to their works. It's a much later thing that actually came over from sculpture and kind of made its way into printmaking.
I know this isn't your birds, but I just one of the things you also do are those beautiful shawl. I'll call them banners or silk banners that are colored.
Right. I do a lot of illustrative stuff too. That's more kind of like folklore and imaginative.
Yes, I have those too.
But well, like with the fish thing, I just made this handmade book not too long ago. Oh, thanks, honey. Can you just stand there and hold on to him for a second? So I'm gonna take out this.
Oh my gosh.
And what this book is it's a map of the Kenai River in the shape of a red salmon. So you can see in the detail that right there is that is Skilac Lake, and these are all the little tributaries, the Upper Keeley, Lower Keeley, Funny River, all the way through, and that's where it feeds in at the city of Kenai into Cook Inlet. The cover is from another block I had carved of the sitting on the beach at Kasilof after dip netting and all the skeletons and stuff. this one is one I did right when we realized the museum wasn't going to be open due to the COVID worries. And so the word COVID is really closely similar to the word corvid, which is Raven's family. So this one is called Corvid-19, and it's got 19 ravens.
Wow.
It's got 19 ravens in it. And then in the center of all the ravens is one. Here, hold up. I can't see there. Hold it there. There's one great horned owl that's hunkered down. And so the joke is hunker down, Corvid-19. And then this one is, now this is the same imagery that, hold on, the same imagery that is in the woodblock that we all just watched the printmaking demonstration for. And so it's the same image. Turn. What?
Oh, that is beautiful.
Okay. So those I made them to go on the ceiling at the museum when we have the exhibit. So I wanted to kind of like fill in that space so you get the feeling of when you're walking through the forest and you look up in the trees and there's the owl up above you. So the way I do those is I order silk dance banners from a company called Dharma Trading Post, and they're pretty pricey to get them that size, but it's fun to paint something that big. And then you don't have to worry about framing or anything like that. I started doing them originally because the Sea Life Center had invited me to start exhibiting more work with them. And the Sea Life Center is an amazing place. It's one of our favorite places in the world, but they just don't have a wall for showing art. Like when you exhibit framed art there, you're on this wall behind the escalator that nobody sees unless they're, going up and down the escalator. So I started to kind of think of ways to really maximize on that space. And I came up with the idea of draping huge silks off of the railing on the second floor so that when people walk into the lobby, they're just met with a whole, 10-foot long wall of silk paintings all hanging up above eye level. And I've been doing it for a while now, about 6-7 years with the Sea Life Center. Just started branching out and doing more stuff with the birds on it. Silk's a really big pain in the butt to work with. For years and years and years, I was using the Jacquard silk painting inks where you had to do the whole piece and then steam it for like 8 hours. It was just a colossal pain. I had to make this giant silk steaming device out of an old vegetable steamer and an old stove. It was horrible. And so making silks became a big pain in the butt. Then I discovered this new product that you can just use it almost like you would a paint. It's a special silk painting dye, and then you just iron it, and it sets into the silk, and you don't need to steam it. I need to find, I think I have a bottle of it around here somewhere. I could find the name of it. But it's a wonderful product. And that allows me to just paint directly onto the silks without having to worry about steaming. I do use a resist for some parts. I use a non-wax based gutta resist to form boundaries between areas of one color and another. But for the most part, what I use is another product called No Flow. And you take the silk, and typically if you take just an untreated piece of silk and you get a brush loaded with ink and touch it, that pigment is just going to bleed throughout the whole piece of silk. And so if you go and you just apply a little tiny dot of a nice blue, it's going to run through the whole silk and it'll turn into a very light blue dot of maybe 2 inches in diameter just because it spreads so much. So you can't really do any precise painting at all unless you use resists and contain that pigment into bordered areas, almost like a stained glass. Or you use a stuff called No Flow. And what I do is I just paint the whole surface with a No Flow, and it's kind of like a glue almost. And that holds the pigment into that specific part. So it allows you to paint onto the silk as in the same way that you would paint onto paper. Then you let the whole thing dry thoroughly. You let it sit for about a week, then you iron it, and then you can rinse it out, and the colors will stay.
Wow.
We have one more question.
Okay.
Patty Pedden asks, would you ask Kevin how he got started doing his art and when?
Oh, well, when I was really little, I've always had sketchbooks. And when I was very young, my grandfather did some art, and I actually, where'd that book go? I have a sketchbook here that my wife actually bound together out of my grandfather's old art papers. So like the thick old watercolor and charcoal papers. And this is a very old sketchbook. It's about 20, 30 years old. Is also, I have an uncle who's a sculptor and a fine artist. And, you know, I never took any art classes or lessons or anything, but, you know, I used to sit with him on the beach up in Lake Michigan, and he gave me a lot of good tips, like the composition one that we were talking about earlier in the wood block, just looking for that coil of the mathematical balance. That's all stuff that he had let me know. One of his other big lessons to me was the importance of grays and how you don't see black in nature, which is funny because I use so much black ink in my printmaking. But he really impressed upon me the importance of mixing grays. And so, like, if you look at my watercolor set, it's just everything kind of bled together and mixing good grays. But other than that, I never had any real training. I just sketch, doodle. I was always a big comic book fan, and then started tattooing. And then to do good tattoo work and to make money at it, I had to really refine my draftsmanship and my you know, representational art methods, because people want what they want and they want it to look the way they want it because it's on their skin forever. So I had to get pretty good at drawing different things, especially skulls.
Well, thanks again, everybody, for attending our launch party. I hope you do check out the website and take a look at more of Kevin's work.
I really wanted to thank the whole team in Valdez, because we all faced these huge obstacles with the COVID closure and all these challenges put in front of us. And I just appreciate all the work and effort that they did to make this still happen. And for everybody that's listening, please know that we are still going to have an in-person exhibit. We are going to be showing this work in Valdez, so you'll be able to see it in person at some point. But the incredible work that Andrew and Faith did to make it virtual for you guys is just, it's wonderful. So thank you. How about next time we'll do a silk painting presentation. I'll get something ready and we'll stretch a silk out, and then we can spend an hour or so going through some of the different techniques.